All right, CJ. So this is the portion of our time together on Wednesday nights where we try to find some common ground between philosophy and music. And typically our Nietzsche discussions or whatever things that are corresponding to my lectures or whatever are a little bit more scripted because we have my lecture series to operate off of. And these tend to be more spontaneous, just trying to capture a philosophical conversation between friends.
Yeah. And
typically you provide the material for our philosophy of music sort of intersection stuff.
And unfortunately, I have nothing this week. So.
you always have things. And I haven't talked to you about this. I'm going to spring this on you.
Okay.
I can't make heads or tails of it. I'm so preoccupied with building the Noetic product and website updates and things like that like I'm just going to let you be my psychiatrist right now. But it's going to be a philosophical psychiatry, okay?
Well, lay on the couch. Let's see.
All right, so here goes, buddy. So, all my time through graduate school, okay, I had numerous people in the faculty tell me, you got to choose. You cannot be a musician and a philosopher. Mm-hmm. Your attention will be split. And I didn't want to believe that because being a musician was just as much a part of my identity as being a philosopher. And I felt like I had to kill off an essential aspect of myself, a dimension of myself, in order to be Luke Johnson, PhD.
Yeah, Dr. Johnson, yeah.
And I stubbornly fought that. And it's no secret, my PhD has taken longer than people that I entered the program with. Mm-hmm. And there are a multitude of reasons for that. But I will be willing to confess this, given what I know now about working on the Noetic product, that maybe there was something to that advice that I was getting from faculty members. Because I'll say this. I spend almost all my time on philosophy nowadays. The only time I really listen to music is when you and I are making it. And we're not making pop music. We're making crazy music that eventually we'll share with people. We're making this crazy music or whatever. When I'm in the car, I'm listening to books on tape. I'm going over the podcasts and lectures to make sure they're as perfect as possible for this product. And I am just going so hard on philosophy. And what I'm noticing is that I'm getting really smart. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I'm getting really smart, if that doesn't sound arrogant, it probably does, oh well, is that the space that was reserved in my brain for music is now being taken over by philosophy. So now, in the past, I would have been in the car absorbing songs, recombining them, Frankensteining them, so then I could go into a studio and make something entirely new. But now I'm like at a creative low point because it's all philosophy. Furthermore, because philosophy is so damn rigorous, I'm actually becoming less interested in music. I actually find music to be kind of boring, or at least pop music. I find it to be kind of boring and predictable. I feel like philosophy, because it's eating up this part of me that was creative, and now I'm a unified vision, or at least the most I've been in a long, long time. And I'm a better philosopher now than I've probably ever been. I'm finding I'm becoming a worse producer, a worse creative musician, and stuff like that. And what I find so fascinating about this is that it seems like philosophy and music sort of take up the same parts of at least Luke Johnson's brain, and that they're not unlimited, and that ultimately one's got a rule in order to become an expert. So I'm yielding to some of that criticism that I thought was totally ill-advised when I first entered my graduate program. So help me. Help me understand what's going on. Help me understand
I'm
what's
curious,
going on.
though. I'm curious, do you feel like philosophy doesn't help your music playing or music thinking, the way you conceptualize music at all, in any way?
I think it does help.
How so?
I think philosophy does help in making music.
Or at least for you. I mean, let's not talk about like universal.
Well, my philosophy education has helped me make music. All right, my PhD was incredibly rigorous. It required a tremendous amount of discipline, and the way that I philosophize requires a lot of visualization, right? And so I have been a somewhat industrious musician, despite all of my PhD work, and still being able to churn out albums and make a lot of songs that require a lot of production, things like that, because of the discipline that I learned from becoming a good, passable philosopher, depending on whoever you talk to. I don't know. Would that mean if I was in the military and I learned discipline in that context, would I be as good a musician as I was or I am now if I had that sort of discipline? There's a guy that I barely talk to. He's a virtual friend. Okay. He's an incredible drummer. We have some mutual friends. I think that's how we got connected. Some mutual friends from music. He used to play drums for Owl City, and I guess he plays drums for like Sarah Bareilles now or what. He's an incredible drummer, and he always talks. And he was in the military, and he does like drum workshops and things like that. And he's a very artistic guy, so he didn't have his individuality snuffed out by the military or whatever. But he talks about how the military kind of helped him become a really great drummer as well. So I wonder if like I went through like sort of the intellectual Marines, and that kind of made me a better musician in some ways, just as like the actual military made him a better drummer.
That's an interesting thing. I remember reading in one of the entries of Kierkegaard's journal where he talks about this idea. I think he talks about art, and maybe not art, but like academic and military, where he says when we talk about military, like, oh, I'm going to beat the soldier out of him. But when we talk about academics, it's like, I'm going to beat the chemistry into you, where it's just almost just like weird. I don't even know what. At first, it's just kind of like, it kind of makes no sense. But then I've been trying to kind of understand what he's thinking about. But this sense where it's just like maybe military and academic, or at least are two different things, where it's like maybe the discipline for military is more so trying to, it breaks you down, but then it builds you up, where maybe like academic is almost just kind of like throwing stuff into your brain, or like just adding more ornaments to what you already have. Like,
there's a lot of breaking down in academics,
right? Okay, so maybe it's still the same.
Anyone who's listening to this, if you are gonna get a PhD, you have to be okay with getting a tremendous amount of criticism.
Sure, especially for your dissertation or anything like that.
And it's meant to refine you. I mean, it's iron sharpening iron. It's not criticism for the sake of being negative, but that's the culture. Is that you have to be willing to be put through the intellectual gauntlet in order to become worthy of that title.
Would you say it's more like beat it out of you than beat it into you? Like, do they like kind of? I know you. Do you know what I'm asking? In a sense,
I think the teaching styles and the programs and the ways that it's administered are far too varied for me to say for certain. And because there's some aspects, like there's some things that, but it's kind of getting away from the main point that I want to talk about. I don't. It's not. I'm not so much interested in sort of
discipline and
I'm not so much interested in trying to kind of reveal what it's like to get your PhD, which might be an interesting topic for the podcast at some point. But what I'm more interested in here is, do philosophy and music sort of eat up the same part of the brain? Mm-hmm. And if you can speak to anything about that, you're a music. All right, so maybe do a little sort of self-diagnosis here, right?
Yeah.
You two are split-brained, right? But you're different. You're heavier on the music than I am, because you're
right.
You're studying classical guitar.
Opposite, yeah.
So you study. You'll practice 6 hours a day or something like that, so you can perfectly perform like a classical guitar piece,
like
or
3 hours,
or whatever. You spend a lot of time. You spend more time practicing than me, right?
Sure.
Right. but you also have this other aspect of you that's very interested in philosophy and ideas and things like that. Do you feel like because you spend all that time doing music, that you are lesser in terms of an intellectual, or do you feel like the music disciplines and refines you? If you took away music, would you become a greater intellectual? Like, do you feel like you have a limited amount of mind space for these things? Are they...
Yeah, I feel like it's tough with this, because I think the way you're phrasing it almost seems like if you do focus on one thing, then you're going to have this regret where it's just, oh no, or like you have to focus on one thing, otherwise you're not fulfilling your full potential.
Yeah.
But I almost feel like if you do just focus on one thing and you leave out something else, you'll have this almost kind of like phantom limb pain where you're just like, this is really weird. Why am I not feeling satisfied or content or happy? And then you say, oh, it's because I'm not focusing on this.
I amputated a part of myself.
Right, I amputated a part of myself, and these pangs of depression or just emptiness, you think like, what is this from? And you're like, oh, it's from that limb that I used to have but I cut off because, well, I'm a philosopher now, I can't do music anymore. I know for me, at least within music, before jamming with you and other people, I never really did as much electric guitar and improvisation that I did in undergrad, and that was actually a really essential part of my musicianship, or at least being the musician that I was, so that when I went to graduate school and just focused on classical guitar, sometimes it felt frustrating, and I felt kind of sad or depressed or whatever, and I kind of like thought like, why am I feeling this way? And then it took last semester for me to kind of like do these different things, like jam with you a little bit. I don't know if that was last semester, but at least recently, like jam with you and have another little group of people that I jam with and be involved with different projects with other people that isn't just classical guitar. And then to do classical guitar as well kind of makes me see like, oh, that's what makes me happy, is just this whole mix of things together in one. Now, granted, that is just strictly music, but I think if you take it within the other things that are orbiting around music, such as film or art or even mathematics, whatever, I feel like if I eliminated any of those things from my life, I wouldn't be the person I am, or the musician.
Yeah, and I think that's why I resisted the advice when I first went into my PhD program.
Yeah, I feel like rightfully. Yeah, it's like, so it's like, why would you just like cut off the limb so you can limp along on the other one, right? Where
well, and
like, why would you do that?
I haven't completely edited music out of my life. I still do. You know, I still do practices with my pop project Cryface, and we do the improv music. So I don't know quite what it's like to not have music in my life whatsoever. Sure. But I'm just saying, I no longer fantasize about music. I fantasize about philosophy, which is I'm noticing my shift in my own psychology, and I'm wondering if parts are being eaten up. Right. But the interesting thing I would want to ask, I definitely feel like philosophy got me to the point where it made me a good music producer. Mm-hmm. And it taught me discipline and all of that. I guess the question I want to ask you is like, did music make you cerebral, or were you always cerebral? Do you think music, I'm kind of wondering if they occupy that same space, and if the philosophy sets the music in motion, and if music can set the philosophy in motion. How did you become an intellectual? Did music ignite that fuse? Or were you always like this? I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious if...
It's interesting because I think they operate the same kind of actions, at least. I mean, being curious about music, you kind of dig and you look up different artists, and then you kind of look up artists that are similar to them, and then you sort of go down a rabbit hole of a certain genre of music, and then you kind of get that genre, and then you look up a genre that sort of takes what they have, but they do something different. And I feel like that's almost like with literature or any kind of, or even mathematics or anything like that, where it's just like you can just be curious about a certain thing and then dig into that. and then dig down that rabbit hole. And then, oh, look, that rabbit hole links to another rabbit hole. And then you go down that rabbit hole and you just keep going and going and going. I feel like that action, at least for me, is very linked to music.
Mm-hmm. Do you think music necessarily makes you an intellectual? Do you think it
does it make... So... By playing music, therefore, I think this.
I don't even know, and I want to make a distinction because there are a lot of idiot people that can play music.
Sure.
Right? Like I don't need to name a name because maybe I don't need to burn a bridge in public, but there are a lot of not so bright people who can play an instrument really well. I typically think of them as being more like performers.
Sure.
But if there's anyone who seriously studies their instrument, will that serious study of their instrument necessarily translate them into an intellectual and more philosophical in nature?
Well, that's when we.
I don't think I've seen anyone who is seriously devoted to their musical craft who didn't have an intellectual dimension to them.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that, again, I mean, I think that kind of touches on, not again, I guess this is the first time we talk about this, but the idea of different intelligences, mm-hmm. where maybe somebody isn't bookish, but they can be really virtuosic in their instrument and think conceptually within the parameters of musical ideas, where I don't think... maybe music doesn't really necessitate a sort of cerebral kind of, in the sense of philosophical or intelligence as we maybe think of it in that sense, but maybe it can include other different kinds of intelligence, like forming melodic ideas or being able to play your instrument really well or being able to drum out a sick rhythm that nobody's ever heard before. I think that's a different kind of, maybe a more tactile sort of intelligence that maybe doesn't fit with philosophy or something. Where, I mean, that's maybe just the case for people that are virtuosic but don't give a rat's ass about intellectual in the sense of philosophical. But I think the idea of conceptual thinking definitely plays into obviously plays into philosophy, but also plays into music too. And I kind of see where I myself combine, at least in those.
Well, let me ask you this. Since I'm so heavy on the philosophy right now, I made this claim earlier that music is becoming, and I don't think I'm the only thinker to reach this conclusion. I think I heard someone else say this at some point. I've heard people say they become sick of music. Have you ever heard?
No, I mean, I've heard Hegel kind of say like music is either a cult act or it's just mere entertainment.
Yeah, there are some.
There
is a tradition within philosophy of philosophers just of hating music. There is some of that, but there's also this tradition where a lot of philosophers played instruments, like Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote chamber music, and the jury has rendered this verdict that Nietzsche's music is terrible, his classical music. Mm-hmm. Have you heard it?
I've heard some of it, yeah.
It's actually pretty good in my opinion.
Yeah. I need to listen more of it, I think, too.
I never heard it, and all throughout my philosophy education, people always trash Nietzsche's music. And then I heard it for myself. I'm like, I couldn't do that. You know? Schopenhauer played the flute. A bunch of people.
I believe it.
Yeah, a bunch of people played music. What I'm curious is, as the more I do philosophy, the more uninteresting music seems to me. Like the more predictable. And I should say pop music. Because classical music, I can't anticipate all the dynamic moves and things like that. It's way too complicated for me to say, oh, I've got this all figured out.
Oh, sure, but sometimes you can.
Sometimes I can. But I mean, it'd be really pretentious for me to say, oh, I know what Shostakovich is going to do from the first minute of Symphony 5, you know, the first time I heard it. So I don't think that's the case. Do you ever feel like philosophy is easy for you or is too simple compared to how deep you are into music? Does it work that way?
No. Oh, you mean is it too easy for me?
Yeah. Do Do you find that because you are so deep into the theory and the practice of music, you look on philosophy as being child's play?
Oh God, no. No, oh goodness. I wouldn't do it if it was child's play. It's still, I mean, a lot of it's still confusing, or I mean, I'm not going to admit. I mean, as much as you say, like, you know, I admit, you admit you don't know everything. Even in philosophy, I'm sure you're just like, I don't know.
No, I don't know anything.
Well, Jesus,
I'm
a simpleton like me, I don't know.
I'm simple like Socrates.
I don't know that much.
Nothing.
Yeah, I don't know that much either. I don't claim that kind of confidence.
Yeah. It's just
music.
So yeah,
or with music as with philosophy or anything. I don't claim that confidence, you know. I don't think that's interesting, you know. I'd rather just like kind of not struggle with it, but at least maybe just struggle. I don't know. Again, I guess like we were talking about earlier, it's just like sometimes I'm more interested in looking at questions than answers sometimes.
Well, let's do a little recapitulation here about what this little investigation has yielded so far. All right. So the first is that there was some sort of consensus that maybe philosophy and music do inhabit draw on some of the same parts of the brain, right? It seems like from our preliminary, and that people who seriously study music in a way become more intellectual and more receptive to philosophical ideas. And I think there's something about philosophy that translates well into music, or people have sort of an appreciation for it or something like that. But it also seems like at least from our experience, the more I go hard on the philosophical aspect of me, the more I sort of view the musical aspect of me as being sort of juvenile. And that is a sentiment that's sort of echoed in a lot of corridors in academia, that music is something that is sort of preparatory for really rigorous philosophical thinking, and there's a time for that, and it's in youth, and then you have to become an adult and sort of put that away. Maybe you can have it as a nice hobby.
Well,
but it doesn't seem to be this. The same thing doesn't seem to infect the people who do music as a profession. They still seem to be sort of interested in philosophy. They don't view that as like a game for high school or college students or something you do in college. It's something that you kind of do throughout your entire life.
But that's a very interesting point, though, because I think even within a certain field, maybe people do feel a sense of...
Do you think anybody in music views philosophy with contempt?
Oh, maybe not contempt. I'm just talking about like view music or view their field as something that there's a lack. I can almost think of art when I think of conceptual art, especially like people like Duchamp, as this kind of going against what's going on. No, but kind of looking at how art was made and saying, okay, this. I mean, I think in Duchamp's words, it was oral. I mean, sorry, visual, or like I'm gonna say oral. Oral is
ear
shit. That it's mostly just pretty. I mean, let's say there's mostly just paintings just to look at for fun. Almost like I got maybe like a musician be like, oh, there's some music where it's just like, oh, it's just pretty to listen to, but there's no depth, there's no thinking. But at least he thought like, okay, well, this is getting out of hand, and I just need to abandon what we know as art is all together and try to do something completely different. And he did his ready-mades where he put a urinal, framed a urinal and put it in a gallery. But this, I think that combines, the idea of conceptual art kind of combines with philosophy, at least in the sense that, conceptual, that it's mostly about ideas rather than, what kind of shading does he use? Or it's mostly about, like, what ideas are presented in this work? Or what ideas are projected, or what is the artist trying to project, at least in terms of ideas about art, about life, about things. And I can kind of see that, at least in that form. And then maybe I can see it with music, where maybe some people are just like, music... there's some parts of music that are cool and some that aren't, and that you're trying to think of different things. I know at least for me, sometimes I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not necessarily getting bored, but it's just like, like we've moved so far with music, but we still have the same sort of distribution of music that we've had for maybe hundreds of years, or even the same way we listen to it, where it's just like, okay, we just have an album. Like, why hasn't anybody come up with something where it's just like music becomes this thing which is completely random, and it includes a visual element, and includes this element, where it's like like a mixed media sort of thing, presentation? Or why don't...
Dude, I know I know a whole bastion of people who are working on this issue.
Yeah.
At UCSD. One of my good friends that I think you remind me of, a younger version of him. And I got in touch with him recently. Crazy ideas about how to illustrate.
Sure, maybe we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think having the idea to think critically about one's field, which you do in philosophy all the time, which I think people do in their own field a lot of the time, is crucial to the field getting better. So maybe this kind of critical thinking and of just realizing what's going on in your field, and not necessarily taking it for granted, but questioning it, which you do with philosophy too, where it's just like, okay, so-and-so says that we can't kill somebody. Why can't I kill somebody? Oh, because of this, this, and this. Why? Because this is this. Almost like you're the little kid, where it's just like, Mom, why is this guy blue? Because of this. Why? Because of this. Why? So I feel like that kind of, whatever you call that, whether it's like Socratic dialogue or just thinking, I feel like for any field, or at least for me, like I couldn't go anywhere, at least with music, if I didn't have that. And if that's thanks to philosophy, then great, then we need more philosophy in our lives.
I'm going to have to bring this one to a close right here. I know it's early, but I have 5% left on my computer, so we have to save this. So
that's
it
fine.
Saves. But I think we should continue this. I'm going to think about a lot of the stuff that you said. But I will too.
Think about
I got to hit stop.
No
It
problem.
was illuminating. Thank you.